Well, it's really interesting what we're going to be talking about today because you and I are both coming from two different perspectives. You're coming from the perspective of a parent. You've got two young boys, and so you're kind of processing how do I engage my family and my kids in these discussions and this media. And I'm just engaging from or thinking about these things as somebody who is just an adult, is a believer. How do I respond to Disney, and how much do I engage in this Disney culture? So it's going to be an interesting topic.
Should we jump in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. All right, let's jump in. This is the Fireside Podcast. I'm Jordyn. I'm one of your hosts. I'm here with Abby. She's our co-host / barista extraordinaire. I'm saying that because I'm drinking my coffee. All right, as you guys heard when we were chattering, we're going to be talking Disney this morning, today, in this episode. However you're watching, whenever you're watching. All right. Let's start with something fun before we dive into the
heavy stuff today.
Yes. All right. So, what was your favorite Disney movie growing up?
I think it was Little Mermaid. I think Mom always says that that's what I wanted on the TV on repeat. I don't remember watching it so many times, but I do love that one. Let's see. Riding Hood was always a really good. No. What was the name of that one?
Robin Hood?
Robin Hood, not Riding Hood. There we go. Which Disney movie was that? Robin Hood. That was a really good one. Loved that one.
Those are good.
Yeah, what about yours?
You know, honestly, I was more of a Barney kid, I found out from my mom, and she lets me know about it. But I also learned about myself on this recent trip to go see family. I had a Mickey Mouse toy that played the MICKEYMOUSE Mickey Mouse song that I didn't know existed, but apparently was my favorite toy growing up as a kid. So I would guess that Mickey Mouse, to whatever extent, was one of my favorites.
Okay.
Growing up. In my memory, any of the ones like the hit music ones, so like the Aladdin. I don't remember being a big fan of The Little Mermaid just because it was like a girl-centered story. And being a little boy, I was like, hey, where's Hercules? Where's, Peter
Pan is also like classic.
Peter Pan's a classic. I still, to this day, have never watched Pocahontas.
Really?
Yeah. I have a Disney list that I just haven't watched. And there's no reason. It's just like...
Never got there.
Yeah, never. Any modern ones that you've really liked or TV series since, let's think Disney Plus?
As an adult, what is...
Yes.
What has been favorites since... I love the movie Tangled. That was a really fun one. I think that was that in my mind is one of their last greatest movies.
Really?
I in this last era of Disney films, once they got into the 3D modeling, which was after The Frog Princess, I think Tangled was one of the first few that they did that was 3D modeled. There's also Brave, that was right around that time where Pixar and Disney were starting to do the 3D modeling together. Yeah. And they were starting to develop this amazing technology where they were making hair and they could make it so detailed. And they developed that in Brave, and then they really refined it in Tangled, which was really cool. So that there was a huge change in the artwork in Tangled, and I think Tangled is a beautiful film, and Frozen is a beautiful film as well.
I just can't stand it anymore.
Even though the songs get a little repetitive.
And they were great when they were great. They were great. Now, not so much.
Yeah.
Man. Oh.
Actually, one of my favorite things that Disney's put out recently, they do these documentaries that are the stories behind the attractions at Disney World or Disneyland, and it's fascinating because they talk to the Imagineers that have created these rides, and it's amazing as an artist to see the thought and the intentionality that goes into creating these rides, and just they are developing things that have never been created before. They are inventing the wheel. It's amazing to see what they come up with.
They're like, what about this really crazy idea? And it's the one part of the work sphere where they go, I don't know, let's figure it out.
Yeah.
It's not no, that doesn't exist.
They never say that's not possible.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
They say
it's
that's not
mind-blowing.
possible yet.
But we're gonna make it possible.
Like, sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that's been really fun to watch.
That is super cool.
Those documentaries. If you haven't seen it, check those out.
I'll have to check it. Do you know what it's called by chance?
I think it's called Behind the Attraction.
Okay, I was gonna say Behind the Mouse, but Behind the Attraction.
Behind the Attraction.
Okay, I'll have to check that out because that actually sounds good.
Really interesting.
I'm trying to think. With all the Marvel being added and the Star Wars being added, I feel like Disney's like this massive thing now. So like when I think like as an adult, like what has been my favorite, I feel like I reappreciate a lot of like the Inside Out, the is it called? Yeah, The Good Dinosaur with Arlo, and some of those where I just kind of, as I'm watching them with William, my son, as I'm watching them, I'm going, oh, I really appreciate that they took the time for this or that, or like I'm seeing like, whoa, the way the water reflects differently. I'm seeing like certain scenes in my head where I'm like, how beautifully they made water transparent, but it still did like water distortion. So like the foot was slightly off in a certain way, how your mind expects it to be. Some of those things are just so cool. Even like WALL-E, like the silliness, like I think I still have that Disney disbelief switch that I can still turn on. I haven't fully engaged in.
You still appreciate the magic behind what they're creating.
Yeah, and I can still enjoy the movie as like
a piece of art,
as entertainment. Yeah, a piece of art, not. And this is probably a great segue into the wokeness. Like I can watch their content and I can choose to like focus on the story and look for their nuances, or I can enjoy the story at face value with my son.
Right.
And we can look at like Luca and the beautiful like color contrasts and the way they've, I was talking about the scaling early when we talked earlier about it, but like the way the body changes from a boy to the sea monster and back and forth, the way the scales fold. In my mind, think of like the nanotech that Tony Stark uses, and it's, that kind of stuff. I can enjoy that without jumping into all the craziness. So for those of you that are joining us, we are talking about Disney, and we are jumping in. We'd been looking at some podcasts and some different articles, and just kind of the theme over the last few months has been like Disney stock is down. Christians all over the place are getting rid of their Disney Plus accounts. They're getting on social media and cursing the mouse and like, hey, get out of Disney. Disney's horrible, and they're anti-Jesus, anti-everything Christians believe. And so we're going to talk kind of through what we're seeing and kind of what we're going through.
Yeah, so a couple of months ago, what really has kind of instigated this kind of this upset that Christians are feeling towards Disney is Disney came out after a lot of the Don't Say Gay stuff that happened in Florida. And as a response to that, Disney has actually come out in social media and made some statements about what they believe. And that's kind of sent everybody into this craze of, how dare Disney? Disney's getting so woke. And so Christians are now kind of trying to figure out, wrestling with this idea of, do we still support Disney, or should I cancel my Disney Plus subscription and stuff like that? So the question this morning is kind of how, as believers, are we responding to Disney, this non-Christian company that has made some interesting statements over the last couple of months? So that's what we're really going to be talking about today. Yeah.
Well, and this stuff isn't new. That's one thing that, as I was doing some research, like Disney jumping on stuff that's outside of Christian belief isn't new. So like starting back in the 90s, there was an unofficial gay day is what they called it. And that has gone all the way through present day. And that's been something where like the entire park is pretty much like taken over, and it's like a different kind of theme where they're embracing that. And that's been around since the 90s. And so I feel like one of the things that as Christians that maybe I feel like I was too young in the 90s to know that this was going on, but like the people that are older than us, like this isn't a surprise that Disney is where it is.
Right.
Like none of this is like, I had no idea Disney didn't hold Christian values. Like, that was an extremely sarcastic voice for those of you that don't know. But me, that's like, we shouldn't be surprised that Disney would do this, but like, I think the shock value comes from how public it is, and the shock value comes with, for us as Christians, like the nostalgia. Like, I feel like that's the biggest thing that I struggle with like even canceling Disney Plus, is like, I love those movies. Those like there are, like, I have that emotional connection to The Good Dinosaur as the kid loses his dad and goes on this journey to find himself, and he's a little awkward, and I'm like, wow, I relate really well to parts of this. Like, I'm a little awkward, like, but
it's not new. I think that's a really important point to take away is, first of all, Disney's not the first company to come out and make statements about these kinds of social issues. This is not a new thing. And also, Disney has never said that they are a Christian company. They are not a Christian company. And so for us as believers to expect them to act as a Christian company, that's just not okay. I mean, they are not. They've made that very clear from the beginning. And so as a believer, like, I do not expect them to act like believers, because they are not. So I think that's like a really important thing to address at the very beginning, is Disney is not doing anything that they've said that they weren't going to do. They're not making claims that we should be surprised about, because they're coming from a secular worldview. That's an important thing to remember during all of this.
Yeah. I saw their, I think you watched this too. There's a video that Disney had this big, like, open board meeting. Did you see that by chance, or like parts of it?
No, tell me about it.
So there was this parts, I believe it was in response to that law, the Don't Say Gay movement, the ruling, which has nothing to do with that, but nonetheless. And let me pull up my notes really quick to make sure I have the right thing. Essentially, like, the CEO was on there, and a bunch of their other creative heads and all the CFOs and all the other people were on there. And, like, they were going through and, like, affirming, like, because they didn't put out an initial statement right away, and people were really, in their community, were really upset about that. They're like, hey, why aren't we taking a stand on this?
Yeah, their own employees were saying, we need to take a stand on this. And
and
so the CEO's response was
we are, like, their intent is to not be so polarizing in politics, but to create the difference they want to see through the films they make and through their content, which as a Christian is terrifying.
Yeah.
If you really think about that, like, a quote that I loved that was said, now that I can't remember who was saying it because I didn't write that down, I just wrote down the quote, but Disney is not representing culture. It used to, or like even our idea of culture. It's not representing culture. Disney's trying to create the culture. There was an interview where one of the creators said, hey, we want every movie to have 50% minority or LGBTQ or gay in some sort of way.
By the end of the year, that's their goal.
By the end of this year. Yeah. And like, in that analysis, it was like, with that quote in mind, it's like, that's not our reality.
No.
That's the reality they're trying to create.
Yeah.
And it really kind of, like, hit me, like, that's the influence, that's the wrestling point, right? Like, that's why when we show these movies to our kids, or if we're watching them even as adults, like, they're trying to create, like, their mission statement that their CEO talked about was, like, they want to support extreme tolerance. They want everybody to be happy, everybody to feel accepted. Everything's okay. It doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing. If it makes you smile, makes you happy, it's okay. And, like, I don't know, like, that's, as Christians, we know that's not true. Like, that's not how we're supposed to live our lives. That's not the worldview that we're supposed to see.
But in the content that they are creating, they are glorifying these qualities. They're saying, hey, these gay, lesbian characters that we're creating, don't they look good? You know, don't they have great qualities about them? Don't they exemplify these great things? They're kind, they're loving, they're respectful towards other people. Doesn't that look good? You know?
Yeah.
And that that is a scary thing, and it's a powerful thing. It's amazing how much control they have over the media and how they're able to get that message out there, and they're making these things that we know to be sinful things look so good.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
Yeah.
And scary.
And as believers, we're told that from the beginning, right? Like sin is the desire of our flesh. Like we as humans want to sin. And so like now they're taking sin that we know is wrong and they're making it look better than it already feels to us as humans. Like we already have to fight sin, and they're going like, hey, we made this sin even better looking for you to go and take in. And by the way, we're going to make it so simple to engage in that your kids are going to enjoy it.
Right. And again, this is not a new thing.
No.
Like this happened in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Like that apple looked so good to eat,
Yeah.
and Satan made it look so amazing.
Yeah.
That did not end well.
And then it ended, and it invoked like power, individualism. Like
Right.
Eve, you will have the power.
Yeah.
You will know what God knows if you eat this. Like in the same way, like, hey, whatever, like this is my life. I want to do it my way, my thinking, my truth, right? Like that was a big point for a long time. Like me, myself, and I. Like I'm the most important. How I feel about myself is how I am. If I am a man, but I feel like a girl today, I can be a girl. Like they're pushing that. Like that's a real thing.
I think at the core of this issue, that is the most important thing. What they're creating, what they're glorifying and telling us to worship is this me culture, where you are the center of your universe. And basically, they want you to see yourself as an idol. Culture right now, we want to see ourselves as an idol.
Yeah.
Everything should be about making me happy and comfortable, and everybody should be okay with that.
And building your brand. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so as Disney's putting out these movies, what they're really doing is they're embracing the LGBTQ agenda, they're embracing feminism, they're embracing all these things, but ultimately if you boil that all down, what they're saying is you are the most important thing, and and everybody should be okay with that. And ultimately, you should be happy with you. It's a me-centered culture.
Yeah. Which is so the exact opposite of what we believe as Christians. Like it's not about me.
No.
Like
love
constantly.
God and love people. Like when Jesus boiled down the 10 commandments, the most important commandment is love God, and the second is love people.
Yeah.
You are not in that.
Yeah, except you are commanded to do these things.
Yes.
The only part of us that has to do with those commandments is the responsibility to fulfill them. Like it's not, and you need to be happy.
Right.
Because in reality, and we all know this, no matter if you're a Christian or not, when you're serving, when you're engaging with loving other people, when you're taking care of other people, when you're spending time with God, now if you're not a believer, you probably don't know this side of it. But for believers, when you're spending time with God, when you're in your Bible, when you're spending time in worship, or when you're serving people, like I was saying just a second ago, like you are experiencing joy, which is a fruit of the Spirit. You are experiencing peace, love. You're able to have patience. Like your life is better because it's not about you.
Right.
And so like in conversations in the past, like talking about like mental health and bringing that in, like one of the biggest problems that we have in our cultures, especially post-COVID, is isolation. The worst thing you can do with anybody is leave them alone by themselves. It is the most inhumane torture you can do is solitary confinement, or like the white rooms like you see in movies, like sensory deprivation. Well, if you spend all of your time by yourself, it's all about me. What happens? Well, we go and check on that person and they're crazy after like 72 hours. And so it's like, that's what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to accomplish us, me, myself, I, selfish, me, in centered, and then we're depressed. So then they can influence us because they're promising happiness.
Right.
And so like they've totally put this divide in and like made themselves God because they can give you the happiness if you do what they want because it's about you. Whereas if the arrows are the other way and you're focused on God and focused on other people, you're truly happy.
Yeah. Well, the way to ensure that you are most unhappy with your life is to pursue happiness. It's like, but really though, because joy and happiness are two different things.
Amen
As
to that.
believers, we pursue God and we continue to become more like Christ-like through sanctification. And the Holy Spirit, he gives us joy. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit. We find joy in doing these things, in loving other people and loving God. But happiness is such a short-term thing. Yeah. It's just an emotion.
Yeah. Happiness is common grace, right?
It comes and it goes.
Yeah, everybody gets it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the most coveted thing in the world. It shouldn't be the most coveted thing in the world. If that's what you spend your whole life pursuing as happiness, you're going to be very unhappy by the end of your life.
Which I think it's really ironic that Disneyland, Disney World are called the happiest place on earth, because you only go there for a very short time and then you leave, and the rest of the world doesn't look like that. Right? So it's like, if you only find your happiness in your quote unquote Disneyland in life, whatever that looks like, whether it be literal or whatever it is, if it's getting lots of likes or it's whatever, when you find your happiness, that goes away really quickly. But the most joyous life you can live that's filled with joy comes from loving God and loving people. And so it's like this huge counter intuitive ideology that like we get into, and as believers, like we've been talking about, that's that wrestling point, right? Like, how do I manage like this content that I have emotional connections to, that, if we're being honest, was this way all along? You know, the idea of I'm happy, so I'm okay, so it's all about me. Like, now it's come to a real pinnacle of like, okay, this is clearly not what I believe. And I'm seeing this really directly. Like, how do we wrestle with that? Like, I don't know.
It's so interesting. And okay, something that I find really amusing about Disney is Disney adults. Disney adults, and it's kind of a funny topic. It can be a very serious topic, but it's kind of a funny topic. There's these people that their whole life, their personality is defined by Disney. And I know some Disney adults, not to this extent. They are not this crazy. But people that go to Disneyland and they are so into Disney. Their entire wardrobe is made up of Disney. They have all of the Disney paraphernalia. And when they leave Disneyland, they don't truly leave Disneyland. Like, outside of Disneyland, their life still revolves around Disney. They are Disney fans to the extreme. And it's so funny because literally everything they wear is Disney. Their whole house looks like Disney. And the sad thing is sometimes it gets to the extent where Disney has become their idol. They worship Mickey Mouse, basically. They worship Disneyland. They worship Disney and the content that they're pursuing. And it's sad. It's sad when it gets to that extent because, you know, their life savings go into going to Disneyland. And ultimately, that is not a fulfilling thing. No. They walk away from Disneyland, or, you know, you take away all these materialistic things that they have put in their house, like their Mickey Mouse ears or, you know, whatever it is. They're unfulfilled. Yeah. They're finding fulfillment in an empty place. And, you know, yes, we call that happiness. They're not happy. Yeah. No. But at the end of the day.
No. They yeah. Yeah. Disney adults. Or is it adults Disney?
Disney adults.
Disney adults.
It is it's amazing from a marketing perspective what Disney has accomplished. Like, they have people that are so far bought into Disney and these characters. They'll spend their life savings on Disney-related product. Or, you know, we have these things called Disney bounding, where you dress up like characters and you go to Disneyland. And, I mean, everything, people's life revolves around Disney. And the amount of marketing that goes into that is just unbelievable. Yeah. But
well, this is hilariously one of the things that that's a perfect transition because one of the things that I believe it was in the what was the name of that podcast that we both listened to, the Genesis one. What's the
I don't remember. Let me look it up really fast.
All right.
Right. Yeah, this is a YouTube video that Answers in Genesis put out, and it's about how is Disney subtly poisoning your children, and us too, you know, as adults too. It's very interesting, and their point was, no one is neutral one of their points. Everybody has beliefs, values. Everybody has an agenda. Disney, they certainly have an agenda, and they have a multi-generational audience who is watching them and who is captivated by them. And Disney, everybody has a religion, and Disney has created a religion, and the religion is these, is seen through the eyes of these characters, these storytelling, and everybody worships, everybody believes in something. They put their faith in something, and that's what Disney is doing, is they are putting together this religion, and there are people who worship at the altar of Disney and Mickey Mouse. And wow, that is a dangerous road to go down. And Disney is evangelistic. That's their third point. And Disney is trying to win people over for their agenda. And yes, there is the fun Disney movies. They want you to watch their movies, and they want you to enjoy Disneyland, Disney World, their cruise ships, or whatever it is. And certainly there are fun things about Disney. I definitely enjoy watching Disney movies. I enjoy going to Disneyland. I enjoy experiencing the rides that they have. There are certainly parts about Disney that are enjoyable, but they are trying to win people for their agenda, and they do that through their media. They do it through these new movies, and we're going to talk about a couple of their movies later on, but they are, like you said, putting out there what they want to see happen eventually. They are creating this reality that they eventually want to see. It's not the reality that exists today, but they're creating this tolerant reality that they want to see in the future. Yeah. And people are buying into it. And
that's terrifying, right?
It is terrifying.
They're doing it.
They are doing it. But they're doing it in a way that is so sneaky, because they're not just going out and saying, hey, this is our agenda, buy into it or don't buy into it. They're doing it through social media. They're doing it through these movies and TV shows that they're putting out, and they're doing it so subtly, and they're making it look so good. And, it could be a couple of characters in the background. It could be a color palette that they're using or whatever. It could be underlying themes that they have in their stories that it looks good on the surface, but it's not good.
Yeah. That's what I was talking about earlier, that Disney switch.
Right.
And they can't see this, but I'm like switching the back of my head, like turning my mind on and off. Like there's that theme of disbelief where it's like I could enjoy any Disney movie
at face value.
At face value. But like as soon as as a parent, I have to kick that in and go, what is this teaching my child?
I think for anybody, you have to be able to filter out what is good and what is bad. Yeah. And like I said, Disney is a non-Christian company. I don't expect them to act like Christians. I don't expect all of the media that they put out to be edifying media. But as a believer, it's so important for us to be able to identify what is sin and what is not sin. And when we can identify and understand what sin is and what sin they are glorifying in their movies, and we can say that is not okay, and I'm not going to believe that, that's great. We need to be able to have that filter, and it makes it so that we can enjoy what they are putting out. They are phenomenal artists. They are creating amazing, beautiful movies that can be appreciated to some extent. Yeah. So long as we know how to filter things out, and that's not something that we just do with Disney. We do it with a lot of other brands that are out there, and we engage with other companies, and we're not going to start boycotting them just because their values aren't the same as ours. I go to Starbucks. Starbucks absolutely has the agenda of the LGBTQ community. They want to be very tolerant. They have made their agenda very clear as a company. It's a very worldly agenda. It doesn't match with the Bible. Yeah. However, occasionally I go get a cup of coffee from Starbucks. Like, I'm not going to stop doing that. I have Apple products. And I love my Apple computer and my Apple iPhone, and I'm not going to stop purchasing Apple products. They're another one that is very much aligned with this worldly agenda that, like Disney and like Starbucks. I can appreciate their products without embracing or affirming their agenda. Yeah. When I drive up to Starbucks, I'm not going to say, hey, nice flag, rainbow pin or whatever. Like, I'm not going to do that, but I'm still going to drink my coffee and be nice to the barista that's wearing that rainbow pin. Yeah. Yeah. That makes me, it makes my mind jump into more questions of because you brought up Starbucks. There was a big turn. I remember even when I was younger hearing about parents and grandparents were boycotting Starbucks. And this was 10, 15 years ago.
And it's like the church has always been really quick to boycott stuff. Like, oh, we don't like that, we're going to boycott it. Well, that doesn't really work when it's something, because like Amazon, they believe in Pride Month. They believe in it. Guess what? All the Amazon packages that you're having delivered right now, doesn't matter when you're listening to this, you probably have Amazon packages either on your front porch or they'll be there soon.
Yeah.
So, like, are you going to stop that?
Again, non-Christian companies. I don't expect anything else from them.
Or when you go online and you want to tell all of your friends how mad you are and that you're going to boycott something on Facebook, right? Like, or on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, that's
really going to do a lot.
Like, you're going to these places that are these non-Christian companies that don't hold your values. So it's like, as Christians, that's the question, right? Like, that's what we're trying to get to, is like, what can we do? What should we do?
How do we engage with them?
Yeah, how do we engage with that? Like, what does that look like to, like, with Disney? So, like, as they're coming up, like, you just watched Turning Red.
Yes. So last night, in preparation for today's podcast, I watched Turning Red. And I've kind of been putting off watching it because I've heard that it's not a great film. I've also heard that it deals with a lot of these controversial issues. And finally, I was like, well, if I'm going to talk about them, I probably should watch it for myself instead of just reading people's reviews. And it was very, very interesting. So I have seen the commercials about Turning Red, and the first thing that they say in all of these commercials, the first thing that the character Mei Mei says, the main character in the movie, she says, "I do what I want, I say what I want, I wear what I want." And again, we're going back to this me culture. This me culture is everywhere. And it's very subtly becoming a culture that Christians are embracing because they don't see it as a bad thing. Again, we see happiness and we're like, yeah, I want to be happy too. So embracing this me culture. So I've kind of been avoiding watching this movie because I knew that going into it, we were going to have problems. But I watched it last night and so many interesting things. First of all, I want to say that I did go into it knowing that I probably wasn't going to agree with a lot of things. I wasn't going to like this movie. So that's kind of where my mindset was. I did want to come out of it and say that there are some really interesting things and some things that can be appreciated about this movie. This is a movie about a girl and her relationship with her friends and her parents. And by the end of the movie, like, she had a great relationship with her parents by the end of the movie. Now, there's some issues with respecting your parents, but they clearly loved each other and they wanted the best for each other. It's not done inside of a Christian, positive relationship with parents. This is an unbelieving family. So loving each other, looks a little bit different for unbelievers than it does for believers. They are trying to be incredibly tolerant of this girl who's trying to identify who she is. There's some issues there that we can unpack, but they clearly love each other. And there's neat themes about accepting people for who they are and loving people, which is something that as believers we do. We love people. We don't embrace sinful things, but we do love people. So that was an interesting concept that we're going to talk about. But also, it's a pretty film. Like everything that Pixar and Disney puts out, they're phenomenal artists. Animation is amazing. That panda has some amazing hair on it. I'm sure they use the same program as Tangled and Brave. So, but you haven't seen the movie yet.
I have not. And
as a parent, I'd be so curious to hear what your thoughts are on the movie, because it does talk about relationship between a girl and her parents. And one of the big themes throughout it is, how do we respect our parents? Is respecting your parents an okay thing to do? And the very first line of the movie, she talks about, well, it's a great thing to respect your parents. But if respecting your parents becomes more important than respecting yourself or doing what you want, that's a problem. It's like, oh, that's a really interesting way to start a movie. All right,
say that quote one more time.
Okay, so I'm paraphrasing a little bit, so just be aware of that. Okay. But basically, her very first thought of the movie is honoring your parents is a great thing. But when it gets in the way of honoring yourself, or it gets in the way of doing things that you want to do, that's when it becomes a problem. That is her mindset at the beginning of this movie. Wow.
See, I have questions in the parenting before this movie takes place. And that's the hard part with these movies. Like, as a parent, if I wanted to, like, look and be like, oh, I don't want to judge them as parents. But, like, if the first thing this child is saying is, like, I love my parents, I want to respect them. But if they tell me to do anything, I'm not going to do it.
Right. You can honor
Like,
them to a point where it's not good. What?
And so it's very confusing to me. But, like, so in this, and I haven't seen the movie. And so I'm just going to kind of give, like, a very, like, I mean, this is all very, like, unthought through other than the thinking I'm doing right now.
Right.
But, like, I mean, I have a rebellious 3-year-old son, and I could see him saying something like that. How old is the kid in this movie?
She's 13. Yeah.
So from one rebellious phase for another, from a 3-year-old to a 13-year-old, you know what? Maybe I'm overestimating children, but, like, that feels like a statement that is, like, overly generalized for a 13-year-old. I feel like maybe a 13-year-old would have a little bit deeper thoughts, but maybe not. But, like, respecting your parents, like, it's so hard. I view life through relationship because you want to love God and love people, and then when you want to love people, you have to know them. And so, like, in this, like, it's hard because when I hear that, it, like, triggers something inside of me that goes, like, this kid, like, must not have a relationship with her parents because she would know that her parents want what's best for her. Because we see a lot of breakdowns in families when there's a lack of communication, like the why isn't explained. So often the why isn't explained, why this is important. Hey, you can't go out because X, Y, and Z. When I hear a kid or anybody say, yeah, I respect you, but you're getting in my way.
Right.
And, like, but, like, there's like an obvious, well, you know what? Let me. This is all real, authentic happening. I haven't thought about this much because now I'm thinking that's a very biblical initial way to think of things, because our culture doesn't say respect your parents.
Right.
Our culture says parents take care of your kids.
Yeah.
There's not a cultural direction outside of faith that says, kids, you need to honor your parents. You need to respect your parents a certain way.
No, what culture says is, hey, parents, you should be setting up your kids to have the best, happiest, most successful life
easiest life,
that they can.
Like, yeah.
And that does not align with what the Bible says. I mean,
no.
If we're looking at this from a biblical perspective, the Bible says honor your father and mother.
Yeah.
And you will be blessed because of that.
Yeah.
But, oh boy, there's so many things here, because then you get into this idea of authority and, you know, how do we respond to people of authority that are in our lives? This is such a big topic, and not one that I think we're going to be able to finish up today. In fact, this is a great place to pause this conversation. And the whole goal of this podcast is we want to get conversations started.
Yeah.
And boy, this Disney conversation is a big conversation. And we're going to come back to this because the movie Turning Red, it's a really interesting movie, and it asks so many questions, and we can really see how Disney is trying to push their agenda through this movie. Now, this isn't the first movie that they've started pushing their agenda on, but it's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of believers, because they really are addressing it in more of a head-on way than they have in the last couple of movies that they've been putting out.
Yeah.
So in our next podcast, we're going to continue this conversation about the movie, specifically Turning Red, and maybe a couple of the other movies that they've put out in the last couple of years, and how we're kind of seeing how they're setting up their agenda, and continuing the conversation about how do believers engage with this media and these concepts, and how do we filter through what is good and what is bad, what is sin and what is righteous. And that's a constant struggle that we're going to continue to have in this world, in this day and age, with media so easily accessible, and with large companies like Disney being able to push their agenda so far because their voice is big, because media has allowed them to have a powerful role in people's daily lives and the media that they're consuming. And so this is a really big topic, and I know that I want to give this some more time and more thought. So let's continue in the next podcast to keep diving into what Disney is doing with these new films.
Yeah, let's
Really
do it.
interesting.
I'm excited for that. So, like you said, we'll wrap up. This has been the Fireside Podcast with Jordyn and Abby. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll look forward to continuing on in the next one.